Chess friends, I hope you are doing well. Today I am going to show you an astonishing chess gambit that you can apply in your games and win more than 60% of your games. This gambit is called the Smith Morra Gambit, and I am going to illustrate the variation and traps that 80% of people don't know. So, let's get started without wasting any time. I started the game with e4, and after c5, after c5 d4, you can play the cunning move pawn to c3, sacrificing the pawn at the opening of the game. This is called the Smith Morra Gambit. Black has a few options to consider, whether to capture the pawn or decline the gambit by playing knight moves or a6 t6 as usual moves. I am pretty sure no opponent would want to consider queen a5 or put the knight in vulnerable looking squares. These are the moves that beginner players usually make. Therefore, if black accepts the gambit with pawn takes c3, you can capture the pawn back. So here, black has a few options to consider. We will delve into all the variations that my arrows are showing here, and of course, knight to f6 is not possible because of e5, therefore, if black dares to consider knight to c6, you can put your knight on f3, and black has two options, to consider d6 or e6. By the way, playing e6 is a reasonable move and a top tech chess engine line, and then you have to put your bishop on the c4 square. This bishop c4 move is very crucial for development. And you need to put the bishop on e3 or your knight is controlling these light squares. Actually, the best move for the dark square bishop is to consider bishop to f4, where it can control the critical squares of the black center. Therefore, after a6 happens in the game to prevent any sort of piece entry, you can castle, and after knight to e7 happens, you can play the powerful move that can stump black, bishop to g5. This move is recommended by a grandmaster and is just marvelous. Therefore, black might play f6, which is absolutely fine to consider. Then after a few moves and the bishop moves back to b3, you can play your next illustrated move because bishop to b7 is coming to get access to this diagonal. Pause the video here and try to figure out what the best move white can play in this position. The move is knight to d5, and after this move, it's like you've shined a torch in your opponent's eyes, and they just become terrible. It's a knight sacrifice because after the exchange occurs, the black knight has to move, and then you can lock down the position by playing d6, seizing these outposts where the rook has the open e-file, and the light square bishop is dominating the diagonal. The bishop comes here, and after capture and recapture, white can play a very strong move. Notice that black has a very insecure king, therefore you can play pawn to f4 because now the light square bishop is driving into the open diagonal, and by capturing this pawn, the files will be wide open. Therefore, black plays a mistake move, queen to f6, trying to protect the pawn and hold the position, but this is a completely vulnerable move. Do you know why? Because after the exchange occurs, bishop to g5 will arrive with the idea of seizing control over the black king completely, and of course, bishop to f7 check can lead to mate. Therefore, after capturing the bishop, queen to e1 check will arrive. The king cannot go to d8 because queen to a5, followed by queen to c7, will lead to checkmate. Therefore, black has to consider bishop to e7 or blocking with another piece. After bishop to f7 check followed by the king moving, capture and check will happen. And you can see that after queen takes e7, black's position will be terrible and hopeless because you can play bishop to h5 check, attacking the black king, and it will be checkmate in just 5 moves. Black will need to sacrifice the queen. Going back to the position, we discovered the variation behind e6. Now let's consider if black dares to play d6, which is also a provocative move. The moves I am showing you are all the same, bishop to c4, and it is very easy to remember and recall the moves while playing chess. Black has a few options, whether to play e6, a6, knight to f6. Knight to f6 looks good for black, but you know what? You can play a shocking move, pawn to e5, attacking the pieces, and if black dares to capture the pawn with the d-pawn, you can exchange queens. Here, king takes queen would be the good move, but if black dares to take the knight on d8, you can put your knight on the b5 square, threatening a check on c7 that will fork the rook. Playing rook to b8 would be the best move, but if your 2000 rated opponent considers king to d7, thinking it can protect the square, you can surprise them by capturing the pawn on e5. Checking the king and preparing to roast the cake in the oven, I mean, the king needs to move back, and then knight to c7 will lead to a checkmate, and the game will be over. Returning to the position, we discovered the variation behind d takes e5. Let's consider if black dares to play knight takes e5, that is also a poor move because you can, of course, capture the knight on e5, attacking the pawn on f7, black will need to capture the knight. Do you know what will happen? Of course, I will win the game. But do you know how I will win? The powerful move that I am going to consider is bishop takes f7, a popular move that many YouTubers have shown in their chess videos while covering the Smith Morra Gambit, to win the queen early in the game. Alright, going back to the position after bishop to c4, we discovered the variation behind knight to f6. Let's say black plays another move like e6, which is also a top engine line. The e6 move has the idea of playing a6, preventing the bishop from entering the diagonal, and covering the center squares well. Black needs to consider moving out the bishop or putting the king in a safe zone like an island house or a beach vacation spot. Therefore, after castling and knight to f6, in a few moves you can play rook to d1, and this is the main line of the Smith Morra Gambit, where the rook is on a half-open file, the pieces are doing their job well, and the game would continue in a simple manner. Alright, going back to the position, we also discovered the variation behind e6. There was no trap because the e6 move was a good move. Now, let's say your opponent considers a6, what would you do? You might be shocked to see this move because the knight cannot go to b5, therefore, you need to first consider castling. And here black has to be very careful with his moves because he must consider knight to f6 and e6. These moves are possible and are the best top engine lines for black, but if your opponent considers bishop to g4, he will be finished. You can take a bomb, I mean, you can take some ice cubes and put them in his shards by dropping them with the powerful move bishop takes f7 check. Sacrificing the bishop like a champion, your opponent might be stunned by your move, as if you've put ice in his shards, and laugh from his chair when he plays king takes f7, then you can play the cunning move knight to g5 check, forcing the king to move back. After queen takes g4, the position will be just over for black. Even if black dares to consider knight to f6, which is the best move to consider, I would consider queen to e6, threatening queen to f7 check. Let's say black considers queen to c8. It doesn't matter because you have the sneaky move queen to f7 check, forcing the king to move, then knight to c6 will lead to a devastating position for black. Now you sacrifice the queen and say bye-bye to the queen, and the game will be in your favor. So, going back to the position, instead of playing queen to c8, let's say black considers queen to b8 to try to escape with the king. Then queen to f7 will come, forcing the king to move, and you can play knight to e6 check. You can see that this position will be just over for him. Even if knight to e6 is not a good move to consider, the best move is to consider bishop to e3, getting access to the diagonal. Then black might consider b5 and put the knight here, and after the exchanges, you can now play knight to e6, and rook to c1 check will arrive with the idea of playing queen to f4. Then queen to d4 will come to attack the black king. The position will be just over for him, and in a few moves, you will see how black suffers in his cage, like an octopus trying to squeeze his way out. Then suddenly, queen discovered check will arrive with the idea of playing queen to c6 check, and knight to c5 will lead to a checkmate. The game will be over for him, and he will have nothing to do in this position. So, let me share an inspirational quote in sudden with you. Be thankful for all things in life, even for the bad things. Sometimes the worst situations in life turn out to be the best things that ever happened to us. Alright, so returning to the position, we discovered the traps, tricks, and strategies that I have shown you with the white pieces. Let's say, after watching my video, one of my subscribers plays the Smith Morra Gambit against you, what would you do? If my subscriber plays the Smith Morra Gambit inspired by me, you might lose with the black pieces. Therefore, let me show you a trap that lies in this gambit with the black pieces. after e4, c5, d4, capture, and recapture in the game, you can play knight to c6, and after knight to f3 happens, you can go with pawn to e6. The bishop comes to the c4 square because I told my viewers to play the bishop to c4 move, as bishop to c4 is one of the most universal moves applied in the Smith Morra Gambit. Therefore, you can play a6 to prevent any piece from entering the b5 square. Another move that black can play is knight to f6. My suggestion for you is to consider knight to f6, and after castling, instead of playing any normal move to give the black king a short vacation, you can swiftly move your queen to the c7 square, which is a crucial move. After one move, knight to g4 will arrive with the idea of attacking the pawn. Here, the best move for white is to consider knight to b5 or rook to d1. Both moves are crucial and amazing to consider, but if your opponent falls into our trap, by considering h3, you can smash them with a bulldozer by playing knight to d4, attacking two vulnerable pieces. If they capture the knight, you can play queen to h2, leading to checkmate. Of course, the knight is attacking the queen, and queen to h2 check is coming. The queen on e2 is under attack, and this position is completely yours. There is no option to protect both the king and queen simultaneously. Your opponent will have to lose one of the pieces, and if your opponent is a poor player, they might protect the queen and sacrifice the king. So, this was our Smith Morra Gambit. I hope you enjoyed the game very much. The tactics and trials that I showed you were insightful. If you enjoyed the game, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Wishing you all the best. Bye bye, take care and see you soon.